Welcome back to the Old Barn on Ann Street. Happy New Year to you. This is the beginning of 2025. I wish all the best for you and your family and your loved ones in the year ahead. But for today, we're going to just pick up where we left off yesterday, and continue on the work. So let's get started.
So the floor is looking really good. We finished sanding twice with the 40 grit, did it by hand, the spot sanded after that. We did the 60 grit and we did the 80 grit. And it's looking really good, and there's only one more round of sanding to do. I've made a decision, some people might say a crazy decision, but an unusual decision, one that I don't necessarily recommend you do, that for this last round of sanding, the final finish sanding, instead of using the drum sander, which we've been using, kind of the one you stand behind like a lawnmower, I'm going to use this, my orbital sander. I'm going to do it by hand. And there's a reason. There's actually three reasons why I've decided to do that, and what some people would say is kind of a crazy decision. And here's what they are. First of all, the finish that I'm using on this floor is called Rubio Monocoat. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But it recommends the best sanding to receive their finish is 120. So I'd like to get it up to the 120 grit for that reason. And the rental store didn't have 120 grit. I could probably get it online somewhere, but I just don't have time to get to that. In a small town, you make do with what you can. So I'm gonna use the 120 grit. I'm gonna on my hand orbital sander. Secondly is it's to pay attention to this detail work in the corners. Now, essentially, when you're sanding using sandpaper, you're making gouges in the wood. When you start with 40 grit sandpaper, you can see, I mean, the higher the grit, the bigger the pieces, and it's rough to touch. It's basically scooping out bits of the wood, gouging the wood with those big pieces on the sandpaper. When you go to the next level, go to 60, it's smaller pieces. So it basically takes the top of those gouges off and makes the gouges smaller. Then when you go up to go to 80, it gets even smaller. And the higher you go in the sandpaper, the smaller the gouges get, and it gets smoother and smoother and smoother. So it's basically just gouging at different levels. When you use a drum sander, all of those grit, all those gouges go in the same direction, which is why it's so important for you to go along with the grain, because it's just spinning like this. It's a drum. It's spinning around and round and round. The problem is when you have a floor like this one, where there's different wood going in different directions, when the drum sander comes to the corner, it's hard to do this well with this kind of detail, because while it does really good work when it's going with the grain, the wood doesn't like it when you're using a drum sander against the grain. So in these corners, it doesn't look that great. One part of it looks good, the other part looks rougher than you'd like it to be. So for an orbital sander, however, like this one, those gouges don't go all in the same direction. They go in random orbital, round, and random areas. So it smooths them out differently. And because it's not all going in the same direction, you can do detail work like this where it works with the grain going in both directions, because it's just kind of doing this. And so this will make it possible for me to take more care, give more attention to the detail of the wood, and make sure it all looks good and there aren't any rough gouges going the other direction. Because here's the thing. I mentioned before that sanding is like 75% of what makes a floor look good. Because when you think everything is good, but when there are gouges going in the wrong direction, as soon as you put your finish on or your stain on, it's going to find those spots. Because where those gouges are, it might make there might be a little bit of a darker stain that goes down in the groove of those gouges, and you will be able to see it. So you want to make sure everything is good. So by taking extra time and doing this by hand, I really think the end product will be much better. And the third reason why I've decided to do this is I just love wood. And this is looking awesome, and I want to make sure it's going to look great when it's done. So we're gonna take the extra time. We're gonna do this by hand, and I'll show you what it looks like when we're done before it's time to put down the finish. So here we go.
That was a lot of work, but it's looking great. We finally got to the end of the sanding. But in case you're going to miss the sanding, just so you know, there will be more sanding later because there's always a lot of sanding. But it is time for us to start finally getting to the repairing of the floor stage, which is what we're going to do tomorrow. So here's a clip from tomorrow's episode. We've got 300 linear feet of hardwood birch, which is what this is. 200 of the feet is 2¼ inches wide, which is what all of this is. But in this part, which will be the kitchen, it's only 2 inches wide, so 100 linear feet. Can't wait to see how that turns out tomorrow. And that's all of our work for today. So until then, I wish you the best. And again, Happy New Year and all the best in 2025. We'll see you on the next episode of The Old Barn on Ann Street.